Our gospel reading is from Matthew 25, 14 through 30. For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I do not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. For as for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is the word of the Lord. In a writing about this parable, former pastor of one of our premier churches in the country, Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago, the former pastor, John Buchanan, tells about the rule of 72 when he's writing about this parable that I just read. Imagine approaching an investment manager or someone who works in the wealth management industry. You ask that person what you have to do and what risks you should be willing to take to double your money. Well, the investment manager may very well tell you about the rule of 72, which some may have heard of and many not. If your investment has a guaranteed interest rate of 5%, you divide the interest rate into 72. And the answer will be the number of years it takes to double your money. 5% into 72 equals 14 and a half years. If you inquire about how risky this is, you will learn that if you want to double your money quickly, the risk escalates dramatically. In the world of venture capital, only about 1 out of 4 or 5, and some say 1 out of 10, make it. Sometimes you lose it all. Well, Jesus told the story in the middle of his own personal high-risk venture. was during the last few days of his life. Earlier, he had made a decision to leave the safety of rural Galilee and instead go to Jerusalem, the capital city. There, the religious authorities would regard him as a threat to the status quo, a threat to their power. And the Romans would probably regard him as a disturber of the peace. The parable is about a wealthy man who goes away on a long journey. And before he goes, he gives his 3 slaves a great deal of money. A talent was a great deal of money. The first slave takes the money to the market, to a wealth management firm, and invests in high-risk ventures. The second slave does the same thing and puts the money to work at high risk. Both do very well, and they reap the benefit of the rule of 72, so to speak. When their master returns, he is pleased. Well done. Enter into my joy. He's going to give them more responsibility in the future, too. Well, then the third slave takes a different approach. And he digs a hole in the backyard. And when he gives that money back to his master, he does not get the same kind of response. He is treated as harshly as anyone in the whole Bible. And Jesus is warning that the outcome of playing it safe, not caring, not loving passionately, not investing yourself, not risking anything, is something akin to death, like being banished to the outer darkness. So the point here is not really about doubling your money and making a profit and accumulating wealth. It is about living. Buchanan says it's about investing. It's about taking risks. It's about Jesus himself and what he has done and what is about to happen to him. And mostly it's about what he hopes and expects of his followers after he is gone. It is about being a follower of Jesus and what it means to be faithful to him. And so finally, it's about you and me. The greatest risk of all, it turns out, is not to risk anything. Not to care deeply and profoundly enough about anything to invest deeply, to give your heart away, and in the process, risk everything. And so the greatest risk of all, it turns out, is to play it safe. To live overly cautiously and overly prudently. And now for most of us, many of us, religion and our personal faith doesn't really seem like a high-risk venture, does it? It can seem something like the opposite. Faith can seem to be simply a personal comfort zone that fits nicely in with the rest of our busy lives. It can be only about personal security. And it can be then a kind of a timid and non-risky venture. Buchanan talks about a timid, safe religion in terms of the sin of sloth, one of the ancient 7 deadly sins. And he says it means not caring, not loving, not rejoicing, not living up to the full potential of our humanity, playing it safe, investing nothing, being cautious and prudent, digging a hole and burying the money in the ground. Well, I want to give you an illustration of that slothful, timid, too cautious faith. And it's about money, but keep in mind that the money symbolizes our whole life of faith and followership of Jesus. Well, when Amy and I went to Chicago, Amy had a little church not too far from mine. It was in a neighborhood, a very densely populated place. Practically beside the church was Interstate 90, I-90. They called it the Kennedy. And just recently, Amy wrote her monthly newsletter to the presbytery about stewardship, and you can read it online on the presbytery website. And she told a story in her writing about stewardship. She told a story about that church, and I'll just quote it to you. I served a church in Chicago that did not replace the boiler in a timely way, even though there were pledges to pay for it, because they could not envision God's future for them. Better to put the money away for a rainy day, they said. By the time I was there, membership was diminishing, and the deferred maintenance on the building was estimated to be $900,000, including the boiler. When it rained, the first floor flooded. There were days when I asked, how much wetter does it have to get? Now, Amy could have used some other examples, and I want to share a couple of them with you. They've remained my favorites over the years. At some point in her tenure there, she and some, I guess, elders or a property committee or somebody went around the building looking at all the spaces and looking at what all needed to be done. And they got upstairs to this big old room that had been used for children's Christian ed, but it no longer was used. And she said, well, how come? And they said, well, the electricity doesn't work up here. So, no heat, no cooling, no lights, no nothing. Well, how come the electricity doesn't work up here? And somebody said, well, there was a fire and it damaged the electrical system up here. A fire? Well, when did that happen? Oh, about 40 years ago. That is a timid religion. This other one too, it's my favorite. All right, so here you are. You got this church, neighborhood church, beside the Kennedy, and it was up a little higher, so from the interstate you could sort of see part of the roof of the church. So on the Kennedy, it's inside the city limits, maybe about 8 miles from the center of downtown, and from early morning till late evening, you can have stop and go traffic on that interstate. You never know how long it's going to take you to get those 8 miles from there. So here you go, you're sitting there on the interstate, and then you get to creep along, and then you got to stop. And so there was a motorist who was in that kind of situation, and she just happened to look over and see the roof of the church. I'll say she, I don't know if it's a she or a he or whatever. So Amy was in her office, and Amy got a phone call, and it was that motorist calling the church out of concern that the roof was going to cave in. Now that's pretty serious when random motorists are calling you out of fear that the roof is going to cave in. No risk and no reward. So let me give you now the opposite, an example of risky faith. Now this is also in her article. She had recently been to a Board of Pensions meeting that happens a couple times a year. And she tells about this most recent meeting. I returned from the Board of Pensions Board of Directors meeting on Sunday. I have been serving on the Board of Directors since June of 2014 and spend most of my time with the Healthcare Committee and the Assistance and Church Engagement Committee, which I now chair. Now, the new motto for the board is serving more, serving better, serving the church, which I kind of like, actually. It reflects a commitment to be both prudent and expansive in a time when it's easy to focus on what is shrinking rather than growing. I have a fiduciary responsibility as a director to provide oversight so that what the board does benefits the members and their beneficiaries. And that's basically the health insurance and pension of clergy is a big part of that. Directors are stewards over $10 billion as of the third quarter. Now, there are professional financial people, there are medical doctors, there are lawyers that all come together to do that actual managing of that big endowment. Now, this is not a responsibility to be taken lightly. I often hear the words risk management, particularly regarding the health care plan for which current dues pay for current benefits. It is important to think about who is covered for what and what may happen during the year. Serving more, serving better. I think of the servant who buried the one talent he received from his master, knowing that the master was stern and afraid of what would happen if he lost it. An argument could be made that he was the wise one, not risking loss and its consequences. Yet, it was the servants who risked the assets that they had been given to care for, who were rewarded for the gains they received. In the kingdom of God, it is worthwhile and even expected to take a risk. In times that are changing so quickly, it is tempting to allow fear to keep us from acting as faithful stewards. We can call it risk management or excessive prudence. Faithful stewardship involves both prudence and risk. We are here to trade with what God has given us until Christ returns. God has given us all that we are. Circumstances change, but the vision does not. Serving more, serving better, being the church. And so, Jesus invites us to be His disciples, to live our lives as fully as possible by investing our lives, by risking, by expanding the horizons of our responsibilities. It is to be bold and brave, to reach high and care deeply. So the parable is the invitation to the adventure of faith, the high-risk venture of being a disciple of Jesus Christ.